Hello, welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. It's the final day of the COP28 Climate Summit in Dubai, and we have a gridlock. The draft agreement has countries at loggerheads as negotiators are likely to burn the midnight oil in hopes of finding a consensus. The summit is also likely to be extended. So what is the issue? The draft agreement mentions the need to reduce emissions. However, it does not outrightly say fossil fuels should be phased out. The United States, US, UK, European Union, Australia and other developed nations have refused to sign the agreement, calling it a death certificate for smaller island nations. Developing nations, along with major oil producers, are opposed to any demand for phasing out fossil fuels. Joining us now to take this forward is Vedha Chaturvedi, Fellow at Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Also joining is Maria Mendelus, Commissioner of Energy Transition Commission and CEO at We Mean Business Coalition. Maria, if I could begin with you, do you think this COP28 is heading towards a failure, especially as far as the agreement on fossil fuels is concerned?
Well, thank you. Well, I think we still have time. It is true that that draft that was presented by the presidency was not acceptable by many of the partners. And the presidency came back and said, well, let's figure out how to come to an agreement. So it will be concluded when it is concluded, and it's always concluded at the last minute, as you said.
Right. How do you think talks on phasing out of fossil fuels this time around have been different from earlier COPs? There seems to be a greater demand for a clearer transition process this time, and the demand is coming from the developed nations.
Well, I think that the demand is coming from business. Business want to transition from fossil to clean. Business know that to continue with fossil, it is continuing with the past, and clean, it is the future. Fossil is more risky and clean is more opportunities. So there has been a call by many companies and countries to triple renewable, double energy efficiency. But the critical element is that we also need to phase out fossil fuels. And this needs to be differentiated depending on national circumstances and also depending on a time scale. But the science is very clear. If we want to achieve the Paris Agreement and keep 1.5 degrees within reach, we need to decline and phase out the use of fossil fuels. And this, for the first time, it has been recognized by the presidency as an important element to be discussed, as something that is inevitable by the business community and by many countries.
Right. Webber, if I could come to you, what kind of agreement or text on fossil fuels would be agreeable to India as we really rush through these last few hours of negotiations in Dubai?
Yes, thank you, Parikshit. I think the big point that India has been making throughout the discussion is that the focus needs to move away from coal because the science very clearly states that it is a carbon emission problem and all the fossil fuels need to be targeted. And that has been a big debate. What we have been successful in introducing fossil fuel in the text. So that is definitely some kind of advancement. But as also already been said in this discussion, it is far from enough. So the language around fossil is very interesting. So it says reduced fossil fuel and within the context of like equity just transition. And that is the kind of a language that is being used for fossil fuel. For coal, they use a very different language. They say rapid phase down of unabated coal power. Plus, they also have very specific mention of no new investments in any coal power plant. Now, this is, of course, not a language that any developing, like fast developing country would agree to, where you have such a big difference between the developed world and the developing world kind of languages. Very less emphasis on fossil, even though it is there in the text, and a very, like you could say, hard emphasis on coal phase down, which is itself kind of very inequitable. But yes, this is what has happened in the last text. So
right.
Not really a very happy situation for the developing world. And of course, this is being disagreed upon already. So hopefully some things will change in the new updated text.
So this text has to be agreed upon by consensus. If all the countries are not on board, this will not be passed as a joint resolution. Isn't that right, Webber?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a multilateral process, United Nations process. So unless all the countries agree to it, and that's why it is kind of an excruciatingly slow process. But the strength of the process is once everybody agrees, things will kind of flow in the direction we want. But yes, you are right. It is a consensus-driven process, and
Right.
that's why in the earlier text there was a much stronger language on fossil fuel. And now that has been watered down significantly. That is also clear. Yeah, that's because some of the countries, especially
Right.
the oil-producing nations and gas, they were not very happy with the very much more stronger language around the fossil fuels.
Right. Maria, if I were to ask you about the big takeaways for businesses worldwide, what, according to you, would be some of the gains that have been made in the negotiations over the last 11 days?
Well, I think business operates globally. They operate in developed and developing countries. So for business, this divide is not how they act upon. I think it's very positive, the conversations that have happened outside of the negotiations and the energy of many of the companies that are looking at very innovative solutions to be invested in many countries. Now, countries are looking for this signal from the negotiators, but it will be very interesting to see what is going to happen on the national plans, because that's where the opportunities lie. And in that sense, you know, business will be looking to invest in countries that have a plan that is similar to their own goals. There are many companies that are setting science-based targets, and they want to invest in countries that have enabling policy environments that are conducive to those goals.
Right. Vaibhav, in terms of climate finance, do you feel that this COP28 has been able to deliver on higher ambitions, higher financing for developing countries?
No, extremely weak language around climate finance. And finance is looked into different buckets: mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. A good thing as the loss and damage fund has been approved. But a very, very interesting thing that has happened also, the decision-making process in the fund. It is, developed world has a pretty significant representation there. And all the decisions like how much money is dispersed, who gets the money, in what form the money is dispersed, and loss and damage also, very likely that the developed world will end up deciding on that. That's what the structure has been. Now that's what has been decided. On the mitigation finance, well, very limited progress has been made. So it is a letdown till now. But also the, what the discussion here that has been happening is developing world will be able to take much more ambitious actions only if there is financial support. So if you don't have financial support available for them, the other part of the text that talks about ambition on the mitigation front, nobody is going to agree to that, because you have not agreed to the other like means of implementation and means of support. Yes, so that's just in absence of financial support, like more commitment, higher goals. You will also not see a lot of rapid action on the financial, on the mitigation front undertaken by the developing world.
Right. Maria, if I were to ask you about climate financing, do you think the private sector would be investing more? Are we going to see more investments flowing into developing nations in the private sector, into the public sector for energy transition?
Well, that's exactly the point, and maybe a dividing factor in this COP is the fact that we have heard that developing countries are looking for some public finance, but actually the private sector can provide much more financing, investment, capacity building, because they will be the one making projects and investment. So I see that some of the developing countries will have to see how to attract that funding, and that will require an ambitious NDC that includes the regulations that will facilitate the deployment of clean solutions. So in some instances, publicly saying that they're not supporting the energy transition, that is to say, fossil fuel phase down or phase out, it's not providing that signal to business.
Right. Finally, what are some of the takeaways that you believe will be among the deliverables, Vaibhav, from this COP28 summit?
Well, one very clearly is the adoption of the loss and damage fund. It is very good. There's also been a progress on the global goal and adaptation, but the African countries are pretty unhappy about it because they are being impacted by climate change in a very big way. So that's a big block that is kind of very obviously said they're not happy with the text. Then some developments, definitely the fossil language, depending on the strength of the language. I think that strength of the language is going to be very important, but it's still Fossil is mentioned in the text for the first time. That is itself a good development. But on many other fronts, you could say the text is a bit of a letdown till now. Let's hope what happens on the last evening. Also, just wanted to add on to what the other panelists have said. I think the role of public finance is very important. Let's not say that the bulk of finance in terms of the quantum will come from the private sector. That is also very clear. But why we're talking about public finances, the public finance is going to be leveraging. It's going to be used to leverage private finance. And that's why if you don't have public finance, private finance will actually not materialize. So we should not be saying that only look at private sector because that money will never come in absence of all the other support. That is what is a big demand of all of these negotiation process of the developing world. So yes, I think we should not kind of only say that private sector will give a lot of money. So we should focus on attracting them. But public finance is fundamental to attracting private money. And that's why negotiation language around finance is going to be fundamental. The new goal on quantified goal on finance, that is going to be very, very fundamental. That will simply up the scale and give a very positive and strong message. But that has not really been happening till now.
All right. All right. Vaibhav and Maria, thank you very much for joining us. Let's see what happens over the next few hours. That indeed is a testing time for many nations over the text, especially the text on fossil fuels. Let's move on. A big news coming in.